Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Chapter 3, Section 1. Today we're going to be talking about the ideals of the Constitution. We're beginning our new chapter and want to make sure that you're keeping up with your vocabulary and bell ringer as always, and ensure that you're starting off this chapter with your vocabulary. So make sure you go to your textbook, find your vocabulary, and begin that before you get rolling. So one of the first things we want to talk about today is the consent of the governed. Okay, so one of the first parts of the Constitution is the preamble, and it is an intro to the Constitution, and it lists the 6 goals of the Constitution. All right, we have here at the bottom, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves, our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So, I don't have enough time to explain each one of those to you, but if you go and you take a quick second and Google each one of those spots where there's a comma, you can start to see what they were trying to do. Now, the idea of the Constitution was that it was based on the consent of the governed, okay, and that we call that popular sovereignty. And essentially, the people vote, and then the representatives do things based on what the people decide, okay, and that's a huge step for government in the world, because even in England, where they had a constitution and they had the Magna Carta and all these things we talked about, they still have a leader who has a lot of power. So the principles of limited government, okay, is essentially trying to place restrictions on the government so that they have some sort of checks and balances system to keep them from having all power. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about is federalism. Okay, and federalism is the sharing of powers between federal governments and states. All right, so essentially you have the federal government who controls things over the nation, but then you have the state government who can make individual specific laws in the state itself that maybe apply for the state, but don't necessarily maybe need to be passed for the nation. For example, there are certain laws on fishing and certain laws on speed limits and things of that nature. Okay, so there's a lot of various parts to our lawmaking, whether it be at the federal level or the state level. One of the ones that comes up most often is, for example, in Colorado, it's legal to grow and sell marijuana. In other states, that's highly illegal, and with the federal government, it's illegal. However, the federal government can choose to allow states to operate against federal law as long as they don't feel like it is undermining the country. And a lot of times, that's how laws change. If a state does something, and then it kind of spreads to another state and another state, till eventually it gets passed in Congress and we amend the law. Now, some of the federal government's powers, they have delegated powers, okay, which belong to the federal government only. For example, being able to declare war, print money, regulate trade. Those are all things that state governments cannot do. All right, so our government here in North Carolina cannot start producing $100 bills. They can't declare war on South Carolina. They could, but that would cause a lot of problems. Now, there's also what we have, shared powers. And these concurrent powers belong to both the federal government and the state government. For example, both the federal government and the state government can tax you. We pay taxes to the state, and we pay taxes to the federal government. We also have the ability in the state governments to establish courts. All right, so you have state level courts, and you have federal courts. And then both federal and state governments, as I mentioned, have the power to make laws. Now, the state government's powers, okay, they have what we call reserved powers, which belong to the states only. For example, establishing schools, driving laws, marriage laws. Okay, there are various things of that nature that are specific to each state. All right, for example, I know there's a law if you're driving through Virginia that you can't have a speed detector in your car. Okay, so you can't have one of the little radar detectors. Those are the little things that are just different. Okay, how schools are established, the way schools function. There's all these various different laws that kind of govern these different places. Now, we also have what is called the Supremacy Clause, which is a part of our Constitution, which says that the federal government is the supreme law of the land. and that if a state law disagrees with the federal law, the state law must give way to the federal law. However, as I mentioned, there are times where a federal law, the government in the federal government will allow the state government to continue to operate with that law despite the fact that it maybe goes against it. Okay? The Bill of Rights is putting power in the Constitution in order to protect the power of the people. Okay? George Washington made sure to add this in order to, number one, get the 13 colonies under the Articles of Confederation to pass the Constitution, but also to ensure that people's rights were protected. You can also see down here in the bottom, we have a ladder of laws. So you have the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law, federal laws and treaties are added afterwards, then state constitutions, then the state laws, then local laws. Okay, that is how each one is in order of power. All right, so that's all we have for today. A little short lecture there. Make sure, however, you're getting all of these notes. And please let me know if you're having any issues whatsoever. If not, I'll talk to you soon.